We know depression through metaphors. Emily Dickinson was able to convey it in language, and Goya in an image. Half the purpose of art is to describe such iconic states. I had always thought myself tough. One of the people who could survive if I'd been sent to a concentration camp. Until one day, I woke up. And I thought perhaps I'd had a stroke. Because I lay in bed, completely frozen, looking at my telephone. And I couldn't reach out my arm and pick up the phone to turn off the alarm. And I thought, something is wrong, and I should call for help. But I couldn't. And after about 4 hours since the alarm stopped, my phone rang. It was my mother. Somehow, I managed to pick it up. And I said, I think I'm in trouble. We need to do something. The opposite of depression is not happiness, but fatality. And it was fatality that seemed to seep away from me in that moment. Everything just seemed like too much work. I would see my phone flashing, and instead of being thrilled to hear from my friends, I would think, what a lot of people that I have to contact. Or I would decide I should have lunch. Then I would think, but I'd have to do all these things, like preparing, chewing, swallowing, and it felt to me like the hardest thing to do. You know that most people manage to listen to their messages and eat lunch and organize themselves to take a shower and go out the front door, and that it's not a big deal. But yet, you are nonetheless in its grip, and you're unable to figure out any way around it. And so, I began to feel myself doing less and thinking less and feeling less. It was a kind of nullity. And then this terrible thought came to me. If I'm not the tough person who could have made it through a concentration camp, then who am I? And if I have to take medication, is that medication making me more fully myself, or is it making me someone else? What if it's making me someone else? And then the anxiety set in. If you told me that I'd have to be depressed for the next month, I'd be okay. I'd say, as long as it'll be over next month. But if you told me I'd have to have anxiety for the next month, I'd rather slit my wrist than go through it. It was like that feeling you have if you're walking and you slip or trip and the ground is rushing up to you. But instead of lasting half a second the way it usually does, it lasted for 6 months. There are 3 things people tend to confuse: depression, grief, and sadness. Grief is explicitly reactive. If you have a loss and you feel incredibly unhappy, and then 6 months later you're still sad, but you're functioning a little better, it's probably grief. And it will probably ultimately resolve itself in some measure. But if you experience a catastrophic loss and you feel terrible, and 6 months later you can barely function at all, that is probably a depression that was triggered by the catastrophic circumstances. The trajectory tells us a great deal. People think of depression as just being sad, but it's not. It's much too much sadness and much too much grief at far too slight a cost. And then I realized I used to volunteer in an AIDS clinic, and I would just talk and talk and talk, and people I was dealing with weren't very responsive, and I would thought, that's not very friendly or helpful of them. But then I realized it. I realized that they weren't going to do more than those first few minutes of small talk. No, it was simply going to be an occasion where I didn't have AIDS and I wasn't dying, but could tolerate the fact that they did and they were. Then I saw a photo of my grandmother who committed suicide, and I began to cry. And I remember my mother saying to me, "Are you crying because of the relatives you never knew?" She had the same disease I have. I'm crying not because I'm sad, but I was overwhelmed, I think. Because I could have been her. I could have killed myself. But my parents kept me going, and the doctor, and the counselors. We live in the right time, even if it doesn't always feel right. I have learned in my own depression how big an emotion can be, how it can be more real than facts. And I have found that experience have allowed me to experience positive emotion in a more intense and more focused way. The opposite of depression is not happiness, but vitality. And these days, my life is vital, even on the days when I'm sad. I think that while I hated being depressed, I would hate to be depressed again. I found a way to love my depression. I love it because it has forced me to find and to cling to joy. I love it because each day I decide to cleave to the reasons for living. And that, I think, is a highly privileged rapture.